Hello, and welcome to tonight's broadcast. I am your host, Carla Thomas, Post News Group journalist based in Oakland, California. Tonight we're having a town hall, and we're going to discuss racism. It's a very touchy subject, and not necessarily my favorite subject, but a subject that needs to be discussed nonetheless. Today we'll be talking about racism from a historic standpoint, and more recent things that have happened, and also some solutions. And joining me today, I have three community builders that have a track record of creating solutions in community building. So thank you, and I'd like to welcome my guests to the show. Mr. Trevor Parham and Chin Nguyen of Oakland Tribe. Welcome, gentlemen. How are you today?
Doing great. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules. Our other guest, Shawn Granberry, has a family emergency with his mother, so I'd like to keep Dr. Tony McIntyre in prayer, and I'd also like to add my dear sister in Christ, Sandy, in prayer, who's having back surgery as we speak. So before we get into our subject matter today, I'd like to first of all pay homage and honor to all the ancestors and all the indigenous people of this country, of this nation, every indigenous tribe and every ancestor that was brought from Africa and enslaved here. I'd like to pay homage to them, all the many people that lived through slavery, survived slavery, the generations that were freed from slavery and their allies. I'd like to pray for and pay homage to all the civil rights activists, the people like Fannie Lou Hamer, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Congresswoman John Lewis, my fraternity brother, may he rest in peace. People like Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who are towing the line today. I would like to first of all pay homage to all the Black lives and bloodshed in this nation, because we're talking about racism. And even though this nation has rebranded and broadened the term into hate, I think racism was the most fundamental and foundational form of hate that built this country. Because let's face it, slaves and African, people from Africa built this country and were forced into labor. So I'd like to first acknowledge all of those lives, all of that bloodshed, and on to the problems that generational problems have created in society, where our communities continue to be marginalized. There's racial profiling, police brutality. I'd like to pay homage to all of the lives lost, especially during the Black Lives Matter movement. People like Trayvon Martin, George Floyd, Sandra Bland, and all people that have experienced that. So today, gentlemen, thank you so much again for attending today's town hall, and let's get started. So my first guest, Trevor Parham, is the founder of Oakstop in downtown Oakland. And for those of you that don't know, Trevor is a community builder and an entrepreneur that has created the most beautiful and amazing spaces in Oakland. And as the founder of Oakstop, he operates a commercial real estate platform for community empowerment. And part of his work with Oakstop has included building the Oakland Black Business Fund, a platform focused on empowering Black businesses with capital, technical assistance, and growth strategy. And Trevor has been awarded by our community, and he's uplifted a lot of our businesses and community during the pandemic. Well, welcome, Trevor.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then Chin Nguyen is my new guest, who basically was a business owner for 8 years, and he pivoted from owning a business in the community to transforming a community park to bring the community together. So welcome, Chin Nguyen of Oakland Tribe. Your story is amazing.
Thank you, Carla. Thanks for having us.
Huh?
Yeah. I said thanks for having us.
Awesome. So gentlemen, let's first of all get your view basically on racism from a historic, level. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that in the context of the U.S., we all understand that racism is sort of, as you mentioned before, foundational component of this country. I think it's also important, though, to recognize sort of the racism, the roots of racism that existed outside of and before this country really even existed in its present state. Understanding that ultimately there were people more interested in both their conveniences as well as their own economic prosperity, and deemed it appropriate and deemed it reasonable to essentially have those conveniences and those that prosperity on the backs of other people. And we got to a place where we essentially were othering Africans for a number of reasons, and using that as a means to get better access to sugar, using that as a means to have agricultural work done. And the mentality was, despite the fact that it was clearly understood as being inhumane, it was still something that didn't outweigh the convenience. So I think that's important because that mentality predated the slave trade, right? So then when you fast forward and you get into the history of America, you recognize that mentality has now already been institutionalized, essentially, and it was something that people knew how to sort of put into operation. So therefore, the entire country, as you mentioned before, was built with racist premises purely from an industry standpoint. What's the best way to get the cheapest labor to make this as profitable and convenient as possible? So essentially, we sowed the seeds of racism within the foundation of this country, and then we've continued to see structural racism grow from those seeds over the years, such that now we find ourselves in this challenging dynamic of trying to figure out who is the racist. But sometimes it's not even a matter of who; it's simply a matter of racism being embedded in the fabric of this country, regardless of the individuals, such that we don't even know, even those who are subjects of racism don't recognize when we are ourselves acting on racist principles. That racism has become so prolific, if you will, that it's even gone so far. Many people don't recognize that even the Nazis based a lot of their treatment of Jews based on what they saw in America. They saw that America's treatment of Blacks was so inhumane and so denigrating that was actually the perfect ingredient to undermine another group of people, was to borrow from what America did. And so I think it's useful to have that framing, because oftentimes here in America, we grow up thinking of Nazi Germany and thinking about how inhumane that was. And despite the fact that it was, they learned that from us. So I think it's just something to reckon with when we look at racism, is to understand how deeply rooted it is here, and how now it's the structures of racism, from redlining to access to credit and capital, et cetera, that continue to impact us on a generational level.
Yes, Trevor, thank you so much for offering that framework. When you bring up the fact that the tragedies that happened in Germany with the Jews, it was modeled on the treatment of us. That just really, really startles me every time I hear it, because we didn't grow up with that knowledge. But, and I don't think people really recognize how just brutal slavery was. I mean, there was a whole word for when they would see the dead bodies, after somebody was enslaved for like 30, 50 years or so. Their bones were contorted in a certain way due to the hard labor that they had to endure throughout their lifetime. So there's actually a term for that. I don't remember what it is. But and then, since you brought up the fact that it all started even before this country was founded, there's like Sandra, her name was Sarah Bartman. She was a Black woman whose body was put on public display while she was alive, just studying her body. She was from South Africa. And there's just been and they had circuses and zoos that they would force us into and put us on display. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And it's just so interwoven into our society that it's important to talk about it and speak up about it. Because when Nazi Germany took over, they say 50% of the reason why Hitler was successful in what he did was because of all the people that remained silent and didn't say anything. So I think it's important for us to realize that if you're not a part of the solution, and if you don't speak up, you in fact are a part of the problem.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you brought up redlining, Trevor. I don't think people understand that one of the most important forms of generational wealth is property, being able to acquire and purchase property. And out of slavery and through civil rights, we still had to be encumbered with Jim Crow laws, which limited us. And so if you're not allowed to purchase land or property over time, you lose a lot of generational wealth. And a lot of people don't necessarily realize that. I mean, we still have a lot of pockets of poverty in our communities throughout the nation, and people want to make it a color thing when really it's an economic and a real estate thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And so a lot of those structures have, generationally disempowered certain groups and primarily groups of color for so long that not only are they subject then to not having that access to that generational wealth, but then they also don't have the base within their community to build power to even combat that. And so then at that point, being disadvantaged, even from the perspective of being able to stand up and dignify yourself, that actually then perpetuates the racist perceptions, because now you're looking at certain groups that don't have certain abilities and they're saying, well, that must be inherent to who they are. But really, it's that you've simply deprived somebody of something for so long that they don't have legs to stand on. And so it's what helps to mask the structural racism, right? The structural racism is really the piece that sort of finishes you before you can start. But then the sort of racist acts, racist behaviors, hate crimes, and things like that are now just sort of kicking someone while they're down. But that's the only thing that we see. But we're not seeing that if we had generational wealth, if we had a certain power base, those other hate crimes wouldn't be possible, because we would have our own police forces, we would have our own militaries even that could combat those types of things. But as a result, since we don't, and since even our own police forces are structured to be able to respond to any sorts of power building, we're in this constant perpetual vicious cycle of not having what we need, but then also people being able to kick us while we're down as a result.
Absolutely. And speaking of kicking us while we're down, I'd like to also let people know that there's a new initiative sponsored by the state of California called California versus Hate. It's CAVSHATE.org. Or you can call 833-8-NOHATE, and you can report acts of violence or racism or hate, whether you've witnessed it or experienced it. So we want everybody to know that there's a resource for you that will connect you to legal entities, mental health entities, and it's not attached to the criminal justice system. Only if you want to get law enforcement involved, do you get law enforcement involved. So Chin, would you like to comment basically on your perspective?
Man, I was just listening to Trevor and everything resonated. I mean, I feel like as a Vietnamese American, I didn't know all this when I was going through it, but thinking back now in my life, as a Southeast Asian immigrant family growing up in the Bay Area, I was going through all of this historic and systemic racism and economic structures that Trevor was speaking on. My parents were refugees coming to the U.S. from the Vietnam War. They had little to no resources, and they had to try to make ends meet. And we were pretty much thrown in the fire in the sense that we were already counted out. The odds were already stacked against us. When you can't speak English that well, when you have very little education, and you are trying to raise a family in this type of environment, you see all these conditions that seems normal at the time, but you're like Trevor was saying, you're conditioned to accept that this is the norm. But when you grow older, you realize like this is the condition that the system puts us into. The trauma that my parents went through carried over to our family, and my parents, when they ended up they had 4 kids, got separated. My brother was trying to be the man of the house and in and out of the streets, and I'm in and out of jail in the streets, getting locked up and stuff like this. It it it's not, you realize that we're conditioned to behave this type of way just to survive,
We're conditioned to accept the unacceptable.
yes. And it's our job to first realize it and to understand that it's not normal. We understand that it's the social economics of this that is forcing our hand in a sense, but yeah, it's the conditions that we're in to that that influences our decisions, and yeah. So I'm just trying to gather my thoughts right now.
It's a lot.
It is a lot. It is a lot.
Like I said, this isn't my favorite subject. It's a touchy subject, but it really needs to be given attention at all levels. And I mean, my grandfather, he had to flee the South with his 18 family members because one brother's life was going to be murdered by white people in the South. So they all fled to save that one brother's life and landed here in California. And then when I was a child, actually a baby, my parents owned a thriving donut shop and restaurant on Fillmore Street in San Francisco, right across the street from Marcus Bookstore. That's no longer there. And the person that was head of redevelopment and probably redlining and all of that decided to demolish that entire thriving Black business corridor to rebuild it. And they told the business owners that once they were through redeveloping it, that they could return. And that was a lie. And it wasn't until my parents were deceased and going through their belongings that I saw the certificate of filing for bankruptcy. And they never discussed that, while they were living. But I think of the impact that had on them, in terms of what risks did they not take moving forward and what they had to sacrifice and double down on to even continue to thrive and reinvent themselves and provide me with a blessed life. So there's just been so many sacrifices.
Interestingly enough, to chime in there, interestingly enough, many people know that particular movement in the Fillmore was also dubbed Black removal. So while many folks oftentimes look at it from an urban planning perspective in terms of redevelopment and things like that, it was also not just redlining, but an intentional strategy to remove Black businesses and Black families from the Fillmore district strategically in a way that could be sort of validated from a development perspective. And so I think it sort of goes to show that it's not just that commerce and business has a side effect of impacting certain groups, but almost the other way around, that we're looking at ways to continue to denigrate and undermine those groups. And then we find other industry methods and vehicles to accomplish that. So that, again, it ends up being structural versus looking like a direct person-to-person hate crime.
Well said, Trevor. Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I was at Congresswoman Barbara Lee's last district download a couple weeks ago. And she was just basically talking about, of course, the outcome of the election. You know, everybody was disappointed about the outcome of the election. And and also a lot of people, I'm not sure, know that Congresswoman Barbara Lee, when her mother was going to give birth to her, her mother went to 2 or 3 different hospitals, and because she was Black, they turned her away. So finally, there was a space for her mother to birth her, but that's the type of racism that has gone on, that we've had to live through historically. And it just seems never ending in some ways, and it's a bit exhausting. And then it's hard when people perceive you, like you said, based on the color of your skin. I don't think people really spend enough time realizing how crazy it is to disrespect and hurt people just based on their color for their convenience. And how, if we're going to all live together in this society, how at some point you marginalize a society, you allow them to live in their own sewage in their corner of the world, but at some point that sewage is going to seep into the other communities, the other protected communities. And then all of a sudden, we want to come up with a solution. So I think we really, really need to re-examine ourselves, get educated, and really unlearn a lot of things. Also during that congressional download of Congresswoman Barbara Lee's, she passed the torch to Congresswoman-elect Latifah Simon. And Latifah Simon, as you know, Trevor, is a powerhouse in the CBO and nonprofit community, and we love her here. And we're excited to see what she's going to do, since she's going to be replacing Congresswoman Barbara Lee. But Latifah is such a powerhouse that she shares the story of her own grandmother in, I believe, Arkansas, who was a wet nurse to a white family. And they treated her grandmother so much like an object or property that when the woman passed away, they did not notify Latifah's family for weeks when she died. So, I don't think people realize, especially speaking of Black women, how much we really, really helped sustain this country, how we birthed a lot of, the children and nursed children that were not our own. And this even though it wasn't me or you or this generation, it still all adds up and is all a part of our genetic makeup and why we're here today, fighting forms of hate. So I want to remind our viewers that we're also discussing hate and the fact that the state of California has created an initiative called California versus Hate. The website is CAVSHATE.org. So if you're the victim of hate or racism, you can call the number 833-8-NOHATE or visit the website. There are resources for you. If you witness or experience any type of racism or hate, please call. Also, it's so important for you to report these acts of hate, because the reporting data that the state collects will give them the opportunity to earmark more resources that we need in these communities. We're in a society where you almost have to make people do something. It's not a common courtesy. You would think that, if a society says Black people or this group of people have this percentage of this problem or this percentage of this issue, that they would automatically earmark more services. But you have to really push, you have to really fight, and you have to almost name a problem in order to get funds to support it. So we're happy that our governor in California has stepped up. We're the first in the nation to have such an initiative. And there are just a handful of other states that should be getting their state versus hate online as well. So I'd also like to talk about, since we've talked about the problem quite a bit, I'd also like to pay homage to the many nonprofits that are really making a difference. whether it's the Chambers of Commerce, Oakland African American Chamber of Commerce, the San Francisco African American Chamber of Commerce, the Chinese Community Development Center, Oakstop, Oakland Tribe, WAPA, Kingmakers, Hidden Genius, and we have allies like the Cape Four Foundation and the Cape Fours that have really funded and supported so many CBOs and nonprofits that are coming up with solutions in our community. I'd also like to thank the 100 Black women, the 100 Black men, and pay homage to Oscar Grant's mother and her foundation and movements, and the many movements in the Bay Area that really continue to keep our communities glued together in spite of systemic racism and hate. You know, Trevor, we were talking about redistricting and redlining and redevelopment, and that's kind of in sync with how they've rebranded us. We've gone from being the N-word to Negroes to colored, Black, African American. Now we're people of color or BIPOC, Black, Indigenous person of color. It goes on and on.
Reminds me of Talib Kweli line where he says, we went from nigga to Negro to colored to Black to Afro, then African American, and right back to nigga. Right? It's like these labels, you know, never serve us, but they cycle through all these different iterations and generations. But, you know, ultimately their label's just the same. And, you know, regardless of sort of how good we feel about it, you know, we're still within a label beyond human.
Right.
How do you guys feel about BIPOC? I've been hearing like different inputs on that and different feelings about that.
I have a lot of thoughts on it. And I guess first what I'll say is that I recognize that ultimately people are trying to figure out ways to be expressive and inclusive at the same time. You know, as most folks know, BIPOC sort of was an evolution from POC, which was people of color. However, I think that people of color for some was sort of glazing over particular groups that needed other support. And then from there, the idea was, how do we then prioritize Blacks first as those who have been most disproportionately disadvantaged and harmed in this country, and then second, Indigenous people who are often left out of even the definition of POC, and then from there speak to the rest of the POC community. However, I also feel like the reverse is also true, and that it's in some circles it's actually harder to explicitly prioritize Black by saying Black exclusively, versus saying BIPOC can be more socially acceptable, because then it sort of softens it to say that while BIPOC is designed to prioritize Black, if you say Black only, then it means that you have a limited perspective, a limited scope, or not being as inclusive. And so for me, I think that it's really, again, I mean, unfortunately, I feel like it's another product of racism, and that we can't explicitly address the racism in this country without also needing to then address everyone else, when at the same time we're acknowledging that it's important to prioritize Blacks and the racism that Blacks have faced.
I agree with Trevor. However, before I was any of those things, I was a little girl growing up in San Francisco amongst 18 different cultures and nationalities. And it was an amazing experience to just be able to just be. And we didn't know we were Chinese, Jewish, or Italian, or Korean, Japanese, or Saudi Arabian. We didn't know. We just knew we were people. And I think once we recognize the real heritage and the truth of this country, you know, once we get older, we can really appreciate all our differences and come together instead of being divided. That's another issue that's going on with this election. It seems like the country is so divided, not just Democrat and Republican, but when you have leadership at the tip top of this nation that's basically dismantling DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. In fact, Walmart just recently took DEI off the table. That's one corporation that I know of. And I have friends that work in the government right now where they're already getting messaging that they're going to have to rebrand their entire departments. Otherwise, their whole programming is going to be demolished. And that was Barbara Lee's sentiment as well, just days after the election, when she had her congressional, her regional download here in Oakland. So it's just, we're living in really, really strange times. So.
Yes. I see there's a question here. I don't know how we go.
Oh, okay.
With this.
Yes.
But I think it definitely ties into what we were just saying about how, there's politicians and the president is having this, is dividing the country up with his thoughts of certain communities. I think there was I remember seeing there was a commercial. He clowned Kamala Harris, where he's saying that she's putting all this money into sex change, and just making fun of that whole community, and trying to win over the conservative votes that way. But in this regards right here, where the question is talking about how my community is trying to navigate the COVID times, I think that it has a lot to do with the president pushing that, the former president pushing now he's the real president, he's the president again, pushing that, COVID was a Chinese
he called it the
disease.
China flu.
The China flu, yeah. And what was very discouraging was that they were trying to divide like the African American community and making it seem like they were just strictly targeting Asians with these like hate crimes. Mm-hmm. And most of my friends are like African Americans, and I never felt like I was hated on, in that community. We go back to what Trevor was saying earlier, like, it just sometimes is this an opportunity to commit these crimes where they're like easily targets. And, we just have to realize we have to dissect each crime for what they are and take a second to ask ourselves, why are these crimes even happening in the first place? Some of them are being initiated by hate, but some of them are just because of the conditions that people are living on. They're living on trauma, and they're just they're hurting people because they're hurting themselves. And I think we have to realize to really make an impact and undo that. We have to heal the people that are hurting themselves, because they're just going to project that type of behavior on others, and they're trying to survive in an environment where the economics is already tough on anybody. So when their lack of internships and youth employments and stuff like that, like, you are more inclined to be in the streets, pimping, robbing, hitting licks, selling drugs, doing whatever you need to do to get by. And that's a product of your environment, of the conditions.
I agree with you, Chin. I attended a lot of the Stop the Asian Hate rallies in my community when that happened. I went to about 7 of them. And that was the same sentiment. It was that hurt people are hurting people. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of the times they would target somebody that was elderly or petite, that made them an easy target. And also, just that the circumstances were horrible. It's like they tried to magnify, make it a Black against Asian thing, when really it was more an economic thing than hate.
Mhm. And
That's
then
like,
you also have to take in consideration of where these crimes or these incidents happening too, where um, in my community, there's a bunch of Asians. And one thing about Asians, we just go without the reporting. There's a lot of unreported incidents happening around here because we know, one, nothing is gonna get done. It can be publicized by TV or Instagram or whatever, but what repercussions are being done? You know what I mean? These crimes are happening in stolen vehicles. Nowadays people are taking stolen vehicles and ramming into businesses, and we catch them on camera and everything, but what is actually being done? So it comes to a point as a community and as a business owner, like, this is repetitive, and you just get tired of it, and you kind of have to live with it in a sense, like you start to accept it now.
I wanted to take just a moment and to acknowledge one of our viewers who said they are viewing the broadcast from George Floyd's memorial. So I want to say thank you for watching. Emmanuel Bro. Thank you. Oh, one of our guests wants to ask you both, how has racism impacted your lives? What would you say, Trevor?
Do you want to go first, or you want to go?
Sure. I mean, in short, I'm still quantifying and measuring that. May take a lifetime to figure it out, right? Again, all of the sort of deep structural racism makes it such that our lives start with that, and we have a hard time even knowing anything other than that. However, I'd say overall, a lot of the same ways that many of us have been affected. Economics, not having access to just the ability to thrive and the ability to get good education. I feel like, that being said, I feel like I was able to get access to quality education, but it came with sacrifice, not just financially, but culturally. And, my parents basically put me in environments where that were incredibly foreign to them, but did so because they felt that it was okay to sort of trade that for access to education, because they didn't have access to education in the same ways, and realized that that was one of their major setbacks as they became adults. So as a result, they sort of went against their better values to say, let's put our children in educational environments where they'll get the education. And even if culturally things are off, it's probably worth it. And I think that that's a narrative that several people relate to, around the world. But at the same time, I think that then growing up in an environment where you can't actually relate to people as you're, developing as a person, because you're, one of the only people in that environment that looks like you, that then starts to have effects. And again, I think that some folks have gotten to a point where, because access to education is so scarce and has been generationally, giving up your self of identity, your sense of self-worth, and your values is a worthy trade to get some of that education. And so exactly, culture is way more important. And as a result, then we have to find other ways to obtain that culture over time, to sort of compensate for what we're not able to get, and sometimes what we have to give up in educational environments. And so in a lot of ways, again, this is a universal narrative, is we're as a result of racism, we're put on a path that is forcing us to divest from our culture, divest from our heritage and our history, as a means to procuring opportunity. And then at the point that you've procured that opportunity, you're now trying to figure out, how do you reconcile that with everything else that you were forced to give up at an age that you may not even been able to be in a position to decide. And so I think that it just goes back to the economic context and sort of the capitalistic roots of racism, that ultimately then puts us back to a place of trying to achieve some form of economic stability. And ultimately we're stripping ourselves of all of our identity that is subject to racism in order to get to where we want to go, which really is racism at its core, right? Is if you take a person of color and you strip everything out of them that is that, then, you know, they may have a chance of succeeding, right? So that's not to say that when people receive an education, they are, you know, completely stripped of their heritage and values, but it's more so to say that we go through circumstances, I would say universally, where there is a price to pay that goes way beyond tuition for you to be able to get those opportunities. And that continues outside of education, and it rolls straight into the working world and your career, such that we know several stories where people from different backgrounds are required to, you know, change their hair and their appearance and things like that as a means to them being able to be compatible in the workplace. And so I guess the message is, again, is that it just underlies your entire life. And you ultimately just have to make a choice as to whether or not you're going to continue to subscribe to it or start finding ways to, you know, turn things back the other direction. And so if anything, I would say that the racism that has impacted me throughout my life has put me in a position where I've decided that I have a role and responsibility to combat that through my existence every day, through my work and everything else that I do.
Great
Awesome.
answer, Trevor. I would say, me personally, I've gone through it in several different waves. You know, growing up, I went to 3 different elementary schools in Berkeley. You know, the first elementary school was predominantly white. The second one was predominantly Hispanic, and the third one was predominantly African American. So I've had to kind of, and growing up in Berkeley around that time, there wasn't many Asians to begin with, let alone Vietnamese. So they just, you know, whenever they see me, kids growing up in elementary, they would always call me Chinese. Oh, he's Chinese. And, you know, you have that rhetoric of, you know, ding dong dong, you know, making those types of noises and types of stereotypes and stuff like that. But I realized, like, that is just a lack of being educated. And I wanted to be able to, as I grew up, I wanted to be able to communicate those types of acts and try to change that narrative. You know, even now when you're working around with in the community I'm at now, it's so diverse. You want to be able to have patience and be empathetic of other people's situations, whether regardless of color. I think a lot of the times when people think of racism, you know, they are quick to think about the color of their skin and their cultural background. But then there's also, like, economic racism too. People around here, we have a strong unhoused population over here, and they're being, you know, they're being stereotyped and they're being judged and they are being treated unfairly as well. You know, when they look at other people's economic status, you know, that is another form of being treated unfairly. So all that being said, I feel like race being targeted and being going through all these types of situations and experience, it's taught me to be able to work with my community better, you know, and have a better understanding of how to move with dignity and integrity, and treat people with respect regardless of age and social economic backgrounds and cultural backgrounds. You know what, you want to be treated as you want to treat others how you want to be treated. So that's what I got from growing up with racism.
Well, I didn't grow up with a whole lot of personal racism growing up. However, I experienced it later in corporate America. I went to Howard University and was surrounded by nothing but Black excellence. And then I continued to work in Washington, D.C. as a producer for Black entertainment television. However, when I moved back to the Bay Area to re-enter television, the doors didn't open. So I think that was a form of, othering, so to speak. And then I worked in satellite communications as the internet was just beginning. And I realized I was under a glass ceiling, both as a woman and as a Black woman. And I travel all over the country representing the satellite communications company, not really realizing I was one of the few. Now that I look back, I realize I was one of the few. And I realized that the promotions didn't come incrementally because of racism. So I now look back on my life and I see those limitations that I didn't, necessarily categorize as racism. I thought they were just giving me a hard time being mean. But when I look back, it's a sobering, a sobering reality.
Yeah. So I'll say one thing, and I'm going to transition in a moment. But there was a question earlier that came up in the chat regarding are all non-whites considered minorities? And then through some of this conversation, we've been surfacing some issues around class. And I think the way that I see it is that you have racism and then you've got these offshoots of colorism and classism. And so to answer that question, I think it sort of depends on how a particular group sort of falls in between those two things. So as mentioned earlier previously, like in a lot of ways, a lot of racism was driven by colorism and sort of then reinforced by capitalism, i.e., one of the reasons that slave traders identified Blacks as being sort of slaves that were sort of convenient, if you will, is that it was easier to identify Blacks. So if they ran away, it was really quick to identify, oh, this person's a slave. So that's why slavery ended up shifting and really focusing on Africans. So that's then how colorism sort of rolls into racism, ongoing into the future. But then at the same time, we're dealing with classism, and particularly in the US, classism basically falls back onto that original narrative of race in this country, and those that were sort of deemed the working class, and all the way down to sort of the free labor working class. And it's then to what degree is a particular group associated with being part of that working class versus an ownership class. So what that can often mean then is that there are groups that are not identifiable as being associated with those groups that may not be as subject to being considered a minority. Or there may be groups that are part of this country, but are not part of that narrative of being part of the working class in sort of America's earliest racist foundations, such that they don't associate that with themselves. And then also people don't associate those particular groups with being part of that working class, such that then you may see some of those groups, number one, have their own resources and come to this country with their own wealth. But then also once they're here, be able to immediately insert themselves into pathways towards wealth building, such that then while they may still be subjects of colorism, they may not necessarily be the same type of subject to classism, because they have the economic means to rise above what some others in this group have not had, historically.
Absolutely. Which leads me into solutions. You at Oakstop a couple months ago were the host of one of the most amazing press conferences I've ever been to. And it was where NBA icon Jason Kidd and current NBA star Jaylen Brown pledged to commit to raising $5 billion for Black businesses across this nation. It was one of the most exciting announcements I've ever been a part of. Can you tell me about that day, Trevor, and what that meant to you?
Yeah, certainly. I hope I'm audible.
Well, there might be a technical difficulty he's having.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So again, looking at the context for a lot of this being economic, and the problem in a lot of ways being capitalism, we can then consider the solution may also need to be grounded in economics and capitalism. So meaning that the press conference that we had in August was focused on a strategy known as the exchange. In Oakland, it is known as the Oakland Exchange. Jaylen Brown sort of originated this concept in Boston with the idea of forming the Boston Exchange. And really, it's a strategy focused on bridging the wealth gap in cities across the country. And the idea behind that is that a lot of the, as we talked about earlier, a lot of the racism that we're experiencing often is for years. And so if we want to right some of those wrongs, we need to figure out how do you start to bridge that wealth gap. In Boston, the statistic that we focused on was the fact that the average white household had net wealth of $1,000 compared to the average.
Trevor, your audio is going in and out right now. I know you're commuting and have to pick up your daughter. So if we're not able to hear you, we can hear you now. You there, Trevor? Well, until Trevor comes back online and we can hear him again, he's basically stating that in Jaylen Brown's research and being inspired by Black Wall Street of Tulsa, Oklahoma, he found that the average white household in Massachusetts or the Boston area was something to the tune of like a couple $100,000 compared to the Black community, which was like, I think it was like $8. Yeah, it was just unbelievable. We can hear you now, Trevor.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. I continued on. So the message there is, how do you bridge that wealth gap? The racial wealth gap is also a means to respond to and combat racism. And the solution focuses on wealth building strategies. And one of the primary determinants of wealth has always been real estate. And real estate in many ways is sort of the basis of capitalism. Traditionally, we're used to these terms that we sort of take for granted now. But if you sort of trace the roots of land ownership back, you get to a landlord. And landlords had tenant farmers who would take care of their land. And
sharecroppers.
Right. And so the message being that real estate is something that has made people wealthy for generations now, such that Black communities in Oakland, particularly in commercial corridors, do not own, a proportionate percentage of the real estate. So we're focused on going into commercial corridors and purchasing real estate as a means to then have that real estate owned by Black communities through collective ownership models, such that as the value of that real estate appreciates over decades, that value then will translate back to the Black community. The other layer of that, though, it's not simply a matter of purchasing real estate, but the real estate is really just the foundational platform to then engage in other programs and activities that will be geared towards generational wealth building. So we're looking at programs like workforce development and job skills training, small business support, even mental health and wellness, incubators for entrepreneurs that have high growth companies, and also trying to match entrepreneurs with industries that have high demand for jobs, such that you can then have not just real estate ownership, but then business ownership, which we understand to be another determinant of wealth. From there, the next layer above operating, building businesses, and creating jobs is then looking at how do you then also build assets for this community and create opportunities for your everyday person to be able to benefit from the economic growth that is resulting from this solution. And so we're focused on creating community equity investment funds, which will allow your everyday person to invest a small amount of money over time incrementally into the same funds that are invested in the real estate that is part of this platform and invested in some of the businesses that have high growth potential, such that if you are a member of this community and you spend your time activating that community, bringing your culture to that community, spending your dollar in that community, you should also be able to watch your investment in that community grow over time. So we view those three components of that strategy, the real estate, the programs, and the community investment opportunities, to then be a solution that can start to reverse some of the wealth gap that we've experienced. And then as we start to reverse and bridge the wealth gap, then we'll also have the ability to have the power and the infrastructure to start essentially responding to and combating a lot of the racism that we experience. It doesn't mean racism will go away, but what it means is now we'll actually have legs to stand on because we'll have wealth, we'll have real estate, and we'll have our own districts that we can control where we belong, where that type of activity, not only will it be prevented from happening, but in many ways they'll be preempted from happening because it will no longer be something that can thrive in an area like that.
That is an amazing model, Trevor. And I love how you simply build community, you change the landscape, and you further even out the playing field.
Correct. And a key to all of this is collaboration. And it's something that we need to look at more critically when we look at racism, is the fact that a big part of racist strategies over time has also been division. If you can break a group down and prevent it from being able to organize, then it's not going to be able to fight the effects of racism. So in our strategy, we're focused on collaboration across community-based organizations and institutions that are essentially Black serving and Black led that can work together to deliver this solution. Number one, we want to have as many minds at the table, but we also understand that if we are not working together, then there is still sort of an opportunity for others to divide us.
Right. You know, I go to a lot of meetings and cover a lot of events where there's the collaboration of the churches with the nonprofits, community CBOs, and it's just amazing to see the work that they're able to achieve when they come together. One organization that comes to mind is Oakstop, which helps sustain and empower the nonprofits and help them prepare for funding and strengthen their business models. And it was great to see you speaking there on the panel there with Latifah Simon a couple months ago.
That's right. Yeah, that was a great conference that Oakstop hosted, and I think it was, appropriately timed as well, just a couple weeks after the election. And the beauty of it is that it was really focused on, how do we start thinking more proactively about collaboration, and when we have these sorts of events, what's the next step? How do we make sure we don't simply walk away with smiles and exchange of business cards, but no means with which to follow up and collaborate thereafter?
Absolutely. And with that said, I want our viewers to know that if you want more information from Trevor Parham's organization, go to oakstop.com, oakstop.com. And if you want to learn more about Chin Wynn's organization, go to oaklandtribe.com. That's oaklandtrybe.com. And also, if you are ever the victim of hate or witness hate, please visit the website California versus Hate. It's CAVS HATE.org, or call 833-8NOHATE. So if you joined our show late, we're talking about racism, systemic racism, historic racism, and how it has undermined our country. It's both built the country and undermined it. But there are a lot of organizations that have stepped up to basically bridge the gap between cultures, communities, and races in order to stop the hate, to heal, and build community. And our guests, Trevor Parham of Oakstop and Chen Nguyen of Oakland Tribe, have joined us on the show. Shawn Granberry's mother had a medical emergency today, so he was unable to attend. So please keep his mother in prayer. If there are any viewers that have any questions, we'll open up for any questions you may have in the chat. And if there's no questions at this time, I'd like to also thank the Post News Group family for this opportunity, for this platform. I want to thank my publishers, Gay Cobb and Paul Cobb, who are community advocates, amazing legends in the community that are the publishers of the Post News Group. For those of you that don't know, the Post News Group has thepostnewsgroup.com and 9 publications: the San Francisco Post, the Oakland Post, Richmond Post, Vallejo Post, Stockton Post, Marin Post, South County, which covers Silicon Valley, and El Mundo, which is in Spanish. Any other questions in the chat? Any solutions that the community has, or any questions? I'd like to also give a shout out to all the organizations making a difference, like, for instance, Lend a Hand Foundation, which supports our youth in our schools year after year. All the backpack galas, all the Christmas giveaways. I want to thank that organization for all their strength in the community. And I have a list of other organizations that I'd like to thank, but most of you know who you are. Any other questions or comments? Chen Nguyen and Trevor Parham, I want to thank you both for today participating in today's town hall. I want to thank our viewers for tuning in. Oh, sounds like somebody's coming back online. Is somebody coming back online? Chen, you still there?
I'm here. I just picked up my daughter.
Awesome. How was school today?
In between. I can't hear you. I'm gonna have the earpiece on.
Okay.
But I
I
just
have
picked
a
her
question.
from cheerleading. But
Awesome.
yes. Yeah, shoot.
I have a question from Kathy Brown. She wants to know who was the other person involved in raising the $5 billion. Kathy Brown, that was Jason Kidd and Jaylen Brown, both of the NBA. Jason Kidd and Jaylen Brown made that announcement back in August here in Oakland. And the movement was started by Jaylen Brown in Boston. So he was inspired by Black Wall Street. And he started the Boston Exchange in Boston. And then he dubbed the Oakland Exchange in Oakland. So tap in if you want support with your business, if you want to be a part of the movement and all this excitement. So Chen, how's your little cheerleader doing?
She's good. She's good. Man, thank God for after school programs.
Okay. And you know,
Yes.
you're responsible for so much programming through Oakland Tribe. Can you tell me a little bit about your transition from having a thriving shop, a boba cafe, and pivoting to managing and creating recreational spaces in the community that everybody can be a part of?
I love it. It is a I do have to still adjust to all the changes, from selling food and drinks to turn a profit, to offering resources and services to the community for free. But I get to make a much bigger impact now, working directly with the community, figuring out why this community is suffering in the first place. I'm right across the street from my old business. My old business was on 6th and East 12th, and the park that I'm running now is literally right across the street.
And that neighborhood's called Little Saigon?
This park
Part of Little Saigon.
Get turned for the worse. I've seen this park get underutilized. I've seen it underdeveloped, and with all my work experience in the city of Berkeley, I know what a thriving park is supposed to look like. We had a lot of support from the city to help out with all the services around. I know Oakland has its own challenges, and I realize all that. We're not going to get into all that, but I do know that what I was seeing at Clinton Park is it needed change. It needed positive change. This whole community needed a boost in their morale, and we needed some hope, and I felt like if I had other opportunities to go elsewhere and find another career, but I felt like this was my calling, and trying to really connect the community to these resources, to bridge the gap with city departments to the community. And all the work I'm doing now, I'm realizing exactly why this community was getting neglected. I realize how the city is operating. I'm realizing why this area is being targeted for all this type of activity. And it takes time to realize all this, and then it's also going to take more involvement and engagement from all parties to get this turned around. And I feel like I can do that with the right partners. I would love to, Trevor. I would love to cross paths with you and see what we can do to help our communities thrive. I feel like we can help each other out in so many different ways. I do have a question for you, Trevor. Is your resources and business assistance, is it strictly for African American communities, or
no?
Okay.
No, we like to center the African American and Black community, but ultimately our entrepreneur support programs, small business support programs, are for businesses in Oakland that have a demonstrated need for such services. So
nice.
Work
because
with you
I have
and find ways to collaborate.
Because I have a strong relationship with all with the merchants around here in Little Saigon, and a lot of these businesses are barely getting by. They're barely making ends meet, and we talk all the time and about all the different type of crimes and incidents that's going on, but there's not enough support. I'm helping another business that just got robbed like weeks ago for the 7th time in 5 years. So we're thinking about just putting like cement blocks in front of her business just to deter cars ramming into her business over and over again. And it's frustrating. So I definitely, like I said, I definitely want to cross paths with you and just see what kind of assistance and resources that we can offer to the merchants around here.
Yeah, certainly. One immediate resource I can let you know about, and others on the call. I'm on the advisory committee for the East Bay Community Foundation's Oakland Resiliency Fund,
Yes.
and the Oakland Resiliency Fund is. Have you heard about it?
Yes, I got her signed up for that already. I got her signed up. I've been spreading
Perfect.
that grant all throughout this area over here. So I feel like I'm the
Great.
I'm just
Great.
connecting the dots to whatever resources that I come across. I just shoot them out to wherever I can, whoever needs it. And then I work closely with the Oakland Vietnamese Chamber of Commerce over here as well.
Nice.
And they're offering grant support to whoever needs it, as long as they're an Oakland business.
Mm-hmm.
So,
so yeah, that's one entry point.
I love to be around people that decide to be the change they want to see. We all know our town here in Oakland is going through a really troubled time. And I mean, we lived through a pandemic. We lived through the destabilization of not having a police chief for over a year, the destabilization of, having to vote in another mayor or recall the current mayor. And in times of transition, chaos, can come about. But your organizations, want to make sure everybody's okay. But your organizations both have decided to be a part of the solution in spite of all the problems. There's always hope. There's always resilience. And you too and your organizations embody that. And I'm very grateful to be a part of the community.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Carla. Appreciate.
And, as always, because so many discussions get watered down. I've been talking black, blickety black, but we all know that everybody else has benefited from the civil rights movement, every culture, every nationality. We just happen to be the backbone of those movements. And case in point is Jesse Jackson, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, and Auntie Maxine, Congresswoman Maxine, all transformed the entire tech industry. It started off with Jesse Jackson and the Rainbow Coalition. He went in to meet with the tech executives that would say, oh, we can't find Black people, for the tech industry. We don't see them. We don't come across them. And Jesse Jackson basically asked them to show them their data in their books. And he basically said, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to build more pipelines. We're going to build more pipelines to HBCUs. We're going to make sure that there's a presence in our communities so that we can further collaborate. And out of that, Jesse Jackson and his team transformed the tech industry to where Intel pledged $100 million over a 10-year period, and all the other tech companies followed suit. And then you had the creation of all these DEI titles and communities within the tech industry. But it all started with Jesse Jackson. And he was on a mission for Black people, Black and brown people, and then all people that were marginalized. So just to give our viewers some perspective.
Right, and we saw that originate even here in Oakland with the Black Panthers, who created several different programs and systems and solutions that started with support of the Black community and then became institutionalized, sometimes even federally, which then benefited, several other groups. And I always like to highlight the fact that many people overlook the fact that the Black Panthers actually created what became the Americans with Disabilities Act, otherwise known as ADA, which now serves people regardless of color, but anyone who had a disability of any kind was essentially subject to various forms of disadvantages and injustices. But that all started with recognizing that a disadvantage of any kind is something that needs to also then have an intervention. And that was the thinking, the mentality of the Panthers. And so it's always great to see where some of the sort of national impact and legacy sort of roots back into Oakland.
Absolutely. I forgot to acknowledge the Black Panther Party. That would have been Shawn Granberry's piece, because he's a part of the new Black Panthers and all the wonderful programming that he's a part of and creates in the community with that. But you're absolutely right. Oakland is the home of the Black Panther Party. To the larger public, they may feel like they were just a group of people with berets and toting guns, but the programming started off with free breakfast programs in schools. And I think that was the first of its kind in the nation, providing free breakfast in the public school system. So.
Correct. And that is another program that we now see institutionalized across the country, that it's easy to overlook the connection, but it ultimately was rooted in groups trying to find solutions to combat racism.
Absolutely. Jen, are you still there? Okay, viewers, I'd like to remind you of a new initiative by the state of California called California versus Hate, CAVSHate.org. If you need to report any racism or hate that you've experienced or witnessed, call 833-8NOHATE or visit CAVSHATE.org. On my first podcast regarding racism, I had James William Jr. of the Civil Rights Department on the call. And he explained the importance of reporting hate crimes, or when you've experienced hate or witnessed it, because that data further gives the state government or the federal government the ability to allocate resources to the problem. When you report this, you can be connected to mental health or legal assistance and just overall support. But it's very important that you report these incidences of hate and racism so that something can be done about it and additional resources can be earmarked for the community. California versus Hate. All right, do I have any other comments or questions from our viewers? We're opening it up again to comments and questions from our viewers. I'd also like to commend the great work of the NAACP on a national level, a state level, and a local level. During my last podcast on hate and racism, one of my guests was Cynthia Adams, president of the Oakland NAACP, and she explained that the Oakland NAACP drafted a resolution and initiatives and sent it to the national NAACP, where they had basically created a new initiative, a resolution regarding racism, so that we can earmark more resources. Also, the NAACP not too long ago announced that they've committed to having a $200 million fund to fund Black funders so that we can support our Black businesses, rebuild and heal our communities, and grow into the resilience we know that we have in our communities. So tap into your local NAACPs. NAACP.org is another resource. Oakstop.com is another resource. And locally, OaklandTribe.org. OaklandTrybe.org. Shawn Granberry was not able to join us because he has a medical emergency with his mother. So please keep him, his mother, and family in prayer. And if you'd like to tap into any of Shawn Granberry's resources, you can visit hiphoptv.com. Shawn is plugged into a variety of organizations and nonprofits and a lot of community building. Okay, gentlemen, are you back? Chen and Trevor?
I am here.
All right. Well, we're winding down with our time, and I'd like to know if there are any closing statements you'd like to share with us.
Yeah, I think my closing statement is that the solutions, again, lie at the root, which is in capitalism. And it's not necessarily to say that we all need to subscribe to the same forms of capitalism, but ultimately understanding that we need to start thinking with strategies that in many ways are grounded in economics, business, and capitalism as a way to reverse some of the effects of the racism that we've experienced. And there are several solutions out there, but ultimately what it also requires then, as if we were both divided and then subjected to capitalism, we need to figure out how we unify and then build our own new forms of sort of economic prosperity, our new models that don't necessarily focus on exploiting, but focus on creating value for those around us, such that then we can collectively build and increase value. So I just always like to sort of ground a lot of these conversations in economics, and then also understand sort of the role that capitalism has played over the years, and how instead of running away from it, we actually need to understand it and use it as a vehicle to get us to a place where we're in a more empowered economic position.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, when I worked for Dr. Julianne Malveaux many years ago, she would write books and talk on every talk show about the fact that it's an economic issue. It's less a color issue, but it's very much an economic issue. And when we bring value to a community, the money will come. So it's about creating value in your community. And I would suggest that anybody that has the capacity and bandwidth to, I would suggest that you see a problem in the world, come up with a solution, and set up your own nonprofit. That's a very, very powerful vehicle to be a blessing to your community. I'd also like to emphasize the importance of using your faith, using your places of worship to collaborate and build and network. And in fact, historically, in the Black community, the church was the center of everything for us. So I think it's often a good idea to go back into our roots to find resources and create synergies. Chen, you still on the line? Okay, we may have lost out on closing out with Chen. But I want to again tell my viewers, the California initiative to support you if you've been victimized by racism or you've witnessed racism or hate, visit cavshate.org. That is your resource, and it's important to report because your data is important to garner more resources for your community. Or you can call 833-8-NOHATE. Again, visit cavshate.org or call 833-8-NOHATE. It's important for you to know that you are a valuable person in our community. And if you experience hate or racism, we want you to feel supported. In fact, during my last racism town hall meeting a few weeks ago, the leader of our state civil rights department, James Williams Jr., explained to me that they just passed a law in our state that law enforcement will now be able to offer the public this resource. If you go to a police officer and you've experienced hate or racism, an officer will share with you this information on the spot. And I think it's important to know that we really, really need to come together for our future, for our children. If you remember the day after the election, so many Black and African American students experienced some racist texts. And the dividing is just, it's unacceptable. And even today I saw briefly on the news that I think a Jewish institution had racial slurs written on it, and that's totally unacceptable. So again, I implore our community to come together, educate yourself, tap into these great resources that you've heard about during this broadcast, and even dig deep in your heart to unlearn some things. You know, just examine yourself about why you would want to hate another person, especially based on the color of their skin. I mean, if that's not dumb, I don't know what it is. But we've got to get past that and come together as a people, come together as women, and join some of these amazing organizations doing great work, such as, again, the NAACP, your chambers of commerce, the 100 Black women, the 100 Black men, BWAPA, Black Women Organized for Political Action. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And, rejoin your places of faith. Your places of faith will help you to, emulate in your heart and soul the love, the courage, and the wherewithal and wisdom that it takes to really, build beyond your community, love beyond you and your family, and just try to make this world a better place. I encourage you all to basically be the difference that you all want to see in the world. And if you have children and grandchildren, you want to take these steps so that the younger generations can emulate you and we can empower young people. So again, I want to thank our guests of Oakstop and of Oakland Tribe. Thank you for contributing to this broadcast. I hope everyone taps into the resources and the information. There's so much good going on in the world that we can get through this racism. We can get past it. We may not be able to change it all, but there's a lot that we can do. And I want to thank you. I want to thank all your comments. I want to thank all of you that joined the broadcast today. And I want to just thank you all for just recommitting to be a difference in the community. And again, in spite of who at the national level is leading this nation, there's a lot of great work and a lot of great people and organizations ready to work with you and to invite you to work with them to advance our culture, advance best practices, advance programming, and just empower us. Because at the end of the day, we are of the human race, and we all deserve a seat at the table. And no one deserves to be subjugated to feeling like they're less than, that they don't count, that they don't have a voice. That is totally unacceptable. So again, I'm Carla Thomas of the Post News Group, postnewsgroup.com, the Oakland Post, the San Francisco Post, the Marin Post, the Richmond Post, the Stockton Post, the Vallejo Post, El Mundo, which is in Spanish, and South County, which covers Silicon Valley. Thank you again for being community builders, great viewers, and supporting our great city of Oakland and the community beyond. Thank you for watching, and have a blessed rest of the week and end the year strong. God bless you all.